listening to the Hearse Chaser broadcast show. Here's your host, Stephen McClellan.
All right, welcome back to the Hearse Chaser podcast show. Today, if you're watching me on video, I'm dressed up today, got a little suit today. Normally, I don't suit up in the office. I had a client a few years ago tell me that I feel less intimidated, more comfortable when you don't wear a suit. And so I thought, okay, I don't want anyone to feel intimidated. So generally speaking, I don't wear suits, but every now and then gotta wear a suit and tie, and that's what I am today. So, and this is probably a good day to dress up because we're talking about a topic that frustrates a lot of families. That is this: where are the estate planning documents? So the topic I chose is hiding wills under the mattress, 1950's called, and they want their strategy back. So it was very common, I suppose, for estate planning attorneys in the 1950's to suggest put your important documents under your bed. You'll sleep better at night with the peace of mind knowing that not only you have an estate plan, but that's where your documents are, I guess. And surprisingly, even in today, a few years ago, I had somebody, they couldn't find some documents, and I had suggested, well, just look under the mattress. Sure enough, that's where they were. So for whatever reason, people put important documents under their mattress. But I think there's some other things to consider. And the importance of this podcast is twofold. One is to encourage you on good placement of your documents. But also, if you're listening to this, you might want to know, well, where are the documents? You might be looking for them. That's very common. A lot of times people say, well, I don't know if they had an estate plan or not. In fact, sometimes parents will tell their kids, yes, I have an estate plan, but they don't actually have an estate plan. That's a phenomenon I've seen, and I don't know if it has to do with maybe the embarrassment of telling their kids they hadn't done it. Not quite sure, but for the purposes of this conversation, we're going to assume that there is in a will, there are powers of attorney, and let's go on the places that I typically find them, okay? So the first place I think a lot of people want to store them is in a home safe. And a lot of times in the South, particularly, there are a lot of gun safes around. And so our documents tend to be in an estate planning binder, quite big. And we often encourage folks, don't stick it in a safe, just put it on the bookshelf. But a lot of people feel the need, I've got to protect it, or someone might steal it. And those are fair. I think those are fair assumptions. I don't think many thieves are going to steal someone's estate planning documents. They're not really going to be able to do much with that. I have heard of a scenario where someone had their documents in a safe, and the whole safe was stolen because they thought there were some valuables in there, and they broke into it and basically discarded it. And there wasn't really much in there for money. So I think you almost run a risk of putting those documents in a safe. If someone stole it, that would be a concern. But the home safe, very important to look there first. If you're going to place those documents in a safe, it's good to give that combination to somebody who would access that. Okay, if you don't, then what happens? The family has to call a locksmith, spend $200 or $300 to break into the safe to get the documents, and that's kind of frustrating. So you want to make sure you write down that safe combination with someone. Now, the second option is a bank safe deposit box. I think this is becoming less and less of a option. People aren't using safety deposit boxes like they were maybe 20, 30 years ago. Most people have safes in their home, or they just don't have those type of things like There's a lot of gold and silver that people leave in those boxes. Bonds, those type of documents were left in safety deposit boxes. But today, people don't use them that much. Now, here's the tricky part that people don't realize. If you put those documents in the safety deposit box, you put whose name can get access to that. So the problem is, if it's just mom and dad's name on it, you might have a problem that the child may have to open up probate just to get access to the box. I've had to do that before, and that's kind of a pain. And sometimes they have to open up probate to find out, oh, you had nothing in the box anyway. So that can be kind of frustrating for the kids. So safety deposit box. So the question is, well, what bank is it? So it's fair to assume that if you're trying to find those documents, it's going to be at their local bank that they've banked at. If you don't know what bank that is, you might want to look at their tax returns. Their tax returns would have maybe a deposit, like automatic deposit on that. Have a bank account routing number. That might help you. Most folks probably most communities have 3 or 4 banks. Choose the one that's kind of the closest. That might help you out. I guess if you ran a credit report, you would find what banks they used, and that might help. But again, I'm hoping here that being proactive, that you communicate with your kids, hey, the documents are at so-and-so bank if you need them. Okay, so that's a common place, less common I see these days. The third option is it might be with their attorney. Now, this is an old school way of doing things. My partner, who practiced about 30 years before me, he said that it was actually the bar's recommendation when he started doing estate planning years ago that the attorney keep the original. That's a little bizarre. I don't think that's the best choice because if that attorney has a fire or a theft, that messes up a lot of people's life. I do not keep originals. I give those originals back to my clients. And I think the bar, that's their recommendation. The file, the documents stay with the client. So I think part of the reason it was that way back in the olden days is because, well, you'd have to go back to that attorney to do probate. So it was a way for an attorney to ensure, oh, the family has to come back to me. I'm going to make money on the probate. Well, today, if somebody has an estate plan like a trust that avoids probate, that really doesn't matter. But even in my local area, I have heard some of the older attorneys still having originals of documents. And that's scary to me. I don't think that's the best practice. But with the attorney is an option. Now, here's what I do. Here's my practice. And I think this is probably the best practice because I think it accomplishes a lot of concerns. So what we do in our firm is scan the originals and give the originals to the client. We also email a copy of the originals. We email to the client. So why I think this is the best way to do it. One, I have a copy of their documents. So if they call me 10 or 20 years from now, I can see what they have. If they lose their documents, I will have a copy of what they had. If they need their documents, I get this. I have clients that travel. They travel up the East Coast in the fall, or they head out to the national parks out west. Something happens, they're on a trail, and they need a copy of a healthcare power of attorney faxed to a hospital. I've done this before. And having those documents, I think, is helpful, a copy of them anyway. And I think this is important because I think in terms of I'm going to outlive my clients. A number of attorneys that do estate planning and elder law, I don't think they're going to outlive, next year or two. Some of them are quite a bit older. There's attorneys that are 90 plus practicing law. And you can, but a lot of people like the fact that I'm going to outlive them and I'll have those documents. I can prepare them and I can have a copy of them. I can read them very quickly and answer questions for kids. So that's my policy. That's how I do it. And I encourage families, you get a copy of those documents, send it to your kids as well. In fact, I think it was Dave Ramsey who said, give everybody a copy of your documents today, even if you disinherit them. I thought that was interesting. If they're going to be mad and let them know while you're alive. That's not the case. I don't see that. That wisdom or not, I just don't see that in my practice, that people actually send the documents to people who are disinherited. They often like to keep that private because they could change their mind and they have wishful thinking that maybe that child might come back in good graces, so they don't really do that. It could be at a trusted family member's home. Sometimes, a lot of times as you age, you'll downsize, either go into assisted living, maybe a nursing home, maybe live with different children, and in that process, documents get lost often. And I think you run a greater risk of those documents getting lost if you disinherit somebody and that somebody finds those documents. That's a concern. So you might want to make sure that you have a trusted person hold on to those documents. I think the most common place is probably in a private home filing cabinet or in a bookshelf. I think that's the most common thing. If you're looking for documents, and chances are mom or dad did documents years and years ago, they probably were in a blue folded envelope. This was very common back in the day. They would take a will and they would fold it up like half and then quarter it, and they would stuff it into an envelope called last will. No telling how many thousands of these have been lost over the years. But it was very common for them to put it in blue, like have a blue cover sheet. So if you're looking for something that's blue, that might help you as you're looking through those documents to find that document. That was more typical of wills. You never really saw trust with that blue cover sheet on it. Maybe in the 90s they did that, but I think 2000s and later, they don't.
Thank you for tuning in to the Hearse Chaser podcast show. Our mission is to be your first choice for last wishes. Want to dive deeper? Join us over at the Hearse Chaser Academy, where we've created 8 on-demand courses for each stage of life. From young adulthood to retirement, navigating separation or blended families, and everything in between, we help you plan for the future, no matter where you're at. Now stay with us as the ride continues on the Hearse Chaser podcast show.
A buddy of mine, I put my documents in a binder, and it's easier for me to read the documents and go through the signing by looking at the pages with clients. A buddy of mine, he does the same amount of documents, sticks them in a folder and gives them to clients. There's not a right or wrong way to do that. I think the folder, the concern there is that it's not as easy to read through that folder. And his assumption is people aren't really going to read through it very often. I totally understand that. But I do know those times when I do read it or go back over it with them, it's nice to have it kind of in a binder booklet kind of format is kind of what I prefer. So filing cabinet is most common. It's worth it to me to spend the money on a binder when we do a full trust so it doesn't get lost. That would be the worst, and I'll kind of talk at the end about what happens if you do lose the documents, what your options are. Let's see. Sometimes it's with an accountant or CPA. That's very, very rare. Accountants and CPAs typically don't want those documents. Someone also mentioned financial advisor. I'll tell you, some financial advisors, they don't even want a copy of the trust. They'll take like a certificate of trust, but they don't want any originals or any copies of them. So you're not going to have much success there. Now, it could be at the bank. It's possible that the bank has a copy of the trust or will. It's possible that they have a copy of it put in their file. Rare, but it's possible. If there was a corporate trustee involved, some attorneys work very closely with trust companies. They get a lot of business from trust companies that refer them business. example, let's say there's a local bank that has a trust department. Well, they will refer their clients to a particular attorney, and that attorney, the idea is that, okay, we'll name all these trusted people as the executors or trustees. Just name us, the bank, as a backup, just in case. That's good money for the bank. They just need, a few of those for that to make good money. That's just part of the system, things that's out there in the world. So it could be that if the documents may have a corporate trustee, a bank trust department may have it. Stored digital copies. We, for our clients, have a vault that we set up for them. This is kind of a newer thing that we've started, and something that I think is going to become more common, that estate planning attorneys offer to our clients, where they can upload the documents, share it with family members. Very, very helpful, because then you don't have to worry about the original getting lost. You still have a copy of it. For healthcare documents, we recommend make sure those healthcare documents, like the like the healthcare power of attorney, is with the doctor, so they have it in your medical records. That it's often give it to your PCP. It's not going to be used in the PCP setting, primary care setting. It's probably going to be used more for hospital ER situations. In those contexts, they can access that power of attorney that's with your PCP. In most cases, they have agreements that they can do that. Attorney here, I think, trumps. There was a scenario once where I had done estate planning for someone, and the client had put my business card in his desk. And the family, and there was a medical emergency, the family, all they found was my business card. And they called me and said, "Hey, I'm so-and-so. Do you know anything about so-and-so? They're in the hospital." And I said, "I do. What's going on?" And lo and behold, they couldn't find those documents, but they had my business card. That's the only way they contacted me. So, wow, that saved them a huge headache of my business card. And I think it's good to have your business card, the attorney business card, on the magnet of the refrigerator at a bookshelf or somewhere where people can find that, so they know who that is. In most communities, there's going to be 1, 2, maybe 3 attorneys that do a lot of estate planning. And so if you can't find the documents, you might want to start with those attorneys. Now, people will go to an attorney that did their criminal law or did their divorce and say, "Will you do my estate plan?" I'm not saying you can't do that, but when you go to that particular attorney to do that, that's kind of outside the norm. Most people today choose an attorney. They say, "Oh, you really do estate planning, I'm going to go to you." And that's helpful in case something happens. You can make an assumption that, well, the guy who's the estate planning attorney in that community, that's who you go to get those documents, or there's a good probability that they'll have them. In the private office drawer, I guess we kind of already mentioned that. There's fireproof bags that you can get for a home. Those are kind of helpful. Sometimes in retirement communities, the residents will have a safe. Clergy members, I don't know how common that is, but you might want to check with them. It might be possible that the clergy recommended someone, an attorney, to go talk to. Sometimes the families will know. Sometimes they'll be at the courthouse. This is one. You can actually file a will at the courthouse in our state. Now, we did this. Somebody did this. Believe it or not, that happened. And then one of the family members got the document and didn't do anything with it. So it's called will for safekeeping. They filed the will at the courthouse, and then another family member contacted me to get a copy of it, and we contacted the clerk, and the clerk said, "Oh yeah, we had the will for safekeeping, but we gave it away." Well, I said, "Yeah, but but you gave it away. Where is it? Did you keep a copy?" "No, we didn't keep a copy of it." So we were just stuck with there was no will, and we had to fight them to get them into court, and that was a little bit of a mess. Hidden bookshelves, that's tucked away, is very common. So these are all the places that you would find documents. Here's some other ideas I had. I do this often. Let's say that I think somebody has a trust or they've done some type of deed with their real estate. You might want to go look up the person's real estate records and see if they transferred the home to a trust or to somebody. And if they did, well, likely there's going to be an attorney name. Like my attorney name is on all deeds, so you can contact that attorney, say, hey, I saw that you did a beneficiary deed. There might be a chance that you also did powers of attorney. Did you do powers of attorney for mom and dad? And sadly, sometimes they don't. They just do a deed. And that's very frustrating for them just to do a deed. But long story short, that's a way that you can look at the real estate records and find an attorney. If a family member had a divorce lawyer and they went back to a divorce lawyer to do a estate plan, you might look up public records to see who their divorce attorney was, to if they happen to do estate planning. Hopefully that divorce attorney said, well, I typically say this is my guy for estate planning. I do divorce work, but this is the guy to do estate planning. You might follow their recommendation to find those documents. So I said I'd finish with, what do you do if you can't find documents? So let me tell you, I had a terrible case where we couldn't find the original, and it was a blended family, and one of the kids challenged it and said, well, the reason you can't find the original is because they destroyed it. Because one of the ways that you can revoke documents, you can tear them up. Well, what do you know? We had to go through a long court process to prove that will wasn't destroyed, it was lost. And that's frustrating. So that was a scenario where we had a copy but not an original. So in a situation where people contest things, that becomes a challenge. There are, believe it or not, there are 14 states that allow for e-wills, wills that you can sign electronically. I'm not a big fan of this, and I don't want to dive too deep into this, but I think this creates some complexity. I like the pen and paper and signing it. Who knows who signs those electronic wills? I think there's a lot of concern with how those things might play out. It is by far the minority and not the majority as far as who does estate planning. So that is a possibility that someone did an e-will. But if I do have a situation where, let's say somebody did a trust, they couldn't find the original trust document, or maybe they found the attorney, but the attorney got rid of their records after 7 years. That's very common. Attorneys don't have to keep documents for forever. Then oftentimes you have to go to court and you have to tell a judge, we don't have the original, but we think this is probably more than likely what it said. And that's a mess, and it's kind of he said versus she said, and you never know if you're going to get a really good outcome in a situation like that. So you want to make plenty of copies. The whole point of doing good estate planning is not to end up in court. And I think you can avoid that if you have multiple copies. And if you use an attorney that is younger than you, and they will be there to answer questions and have those documents, very important, and that they're making copies of those documents. I know it takes me an extra 25 minutes or so to scan in the documents and label them, send them to a client, maybe a little bit longer, but so worth it. And so if your attorney that you work with doesn't do that, highly recommend making a digital copy. Most kids do not want the paperwork. They don't want an extra copy. Most of the families I deal with, they just want a digital copy. Send it to me by email, put it on a USB drive. And that's what they want. They don't want a full paper copy. It takes up too much space, and people can reshuffle them around and make a big mess of it. So I think copies are the best way to handle that. So if you have hidden your will under your mattress, it's still kind of an okay idea, just as long as people know where that is. But probably the best thing to do is to put it in something that says estate planning on the ream that you can stick in a bookshelf. People know where it's at. If you're having trouble looking for those documents, hopefully these suggestions have helped. I wish you the best. I'm sorry you're going through a hunt to find those documents, but I hope if somebody watches this and it helps one person find documents, get them the closure and get them on the path of the estate plan and following those wishes. We certainly hope that this video was helpful to you. Thanks again for your being on the ride with the Hearse Chaser podcast show. We wish you all the best and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Hearse Chaser podcast show. Please remember, you can't outrun a hearse, but you can leave your family with a smooth ride.